So initially, for a moment, totally letting go of resistance, totally letting go of trying to control and manipulate, trying to attain, trying to get somewhere, opens the door for awakening. Awakening itself, actually reality awakening to itself, consciousness awakening to itself, is totally natural. It's as natural as breathing. Awakening is something that's always in the process of happening, and unfortunately we are simultaneously always in the process of denying it. So awakening isn't something that happens that which is trying to awake, the force within one that is actually trying to wake up, reality becoming fully conscious of itself, is always actually trying to happen. It's totally natural. That's why I say we should not be asking ourselves, how do I awaken? We should actually be asking ourselves, how is it that I put myself to sleep moment to moment to moment to moment? Right? Awakening will happen by itself. It's as natural as, slipping on a banana peel and falling on your butt. You don't have to ask how to slip and fall, do you? And even an instant, where the whole project of becoming and future and what I need to do to awaken and all of that, in the moment all that stops, there's no pushing, no pulling. It's seen. There isn't actually a self there. The whole me thing was actually created through resistance, through pushing away and pulling towards. It was all just a creation of thought. And when there's no resistance to even the arising of those self-creating thoughts, when that's not even resisted, when that's not manipulated, then that arises and collapses, and it's seen, that's all, that whole movement is just spontaneous. There's nothing you can do about it. You can't stop it. You didn't start it. It just happens. And when there's no pushing it away, consciousness returns spontaneously to itself. Because when you're not pushing and pulling, resisting, trying to attain something, there's no force that pulls consciousness into a contraction. And so it just, And you run into your own nobodiness. Your true face, which is really no face at all. It doesn't mean that the next thought will never arise. Thought still may arise that can intrigue consciousness into pushing it away or pulling it towards. And if that happens, it seems as though you become the thought, right? You become the person, you become the little individual again. And as soon as you become the little individual thinks, I must resist this. I must get away from being the little individual. Does that make sense? It's like when people have an awakening, the first thing they tend to ask teachers like me after they come back from the honeymoon of awakening. Some of you have been on the honeymoon of awakening, haven't you? You awaken and all is well, total flow, total effortlessness, absolute ease. The me is on a total vacation. You know? And it's very happy to be on vacation. And just everything is simple and just flowing. But in most people, there's a few who it doesn't, but in most people, at some point, the me arises. And it comes back from the honeymoon. And as soon as it arises, and if it's resisted, or if it's believed, then of course it pulls consciousness into a contraction, into an identity, and that identity always says the same thing. How do I get out of here? I've been out of here. I was on a honeymoon. My honeymoon lasted maybe a moment, maybe a minute, maybe an hour, maybe a week, a month, a year, maybe 2 years. And I liked it so much, how do I get out of here? How do I get out of this contraction back into this thought? Right? And of course, with the question itself, how do I get back to that state? How do I stay? You can hear in the question itself is the resistance, right? It's the resistance to being contracted. So the question itself becomes a form of resistance. I don't want to be here, I want to be somewhere other than here. Which is exactly why you're there in the first place, right? So that's the funny thing. If there's any resistance to any kind of limitation, then you're constantly being pulled back into limitation. And about the moment that even the resistance to any kind of limitation is surrendered, then there's no energy anymore to hold you in limitation. See, because then limitation isn't even being resisted. And so it has no force anymore. It has no energy to hold you in its contraction. It's something that a lot of people don't. It's something very, very easy to miss if you get in one of those "I got it, I lost it" phases of awakening. Yeah? Somehow when you've totally surrendered to losing it, then you can't ever lose it anymore. And as long as you have resistance to this experience of losing it, then you will keep losing it. So eventually something in you sees the even deeper level of the way things work, and it lets go of trying to control anything. It lets go of even contracting back into a small space, and there's no resistance to that. Because it's seen with so much clarity at a certain point, with so much certainty, that resistance to it just continues it. And the resistance to limitation actually comes from the imagined self, doesn't it? Consciousness doesn't give a damn if it has a moment of being limited, because it knows it's always unlimited. So to consciousness, it's a game. But to the imagination of self, it's not a game at all. So I could sum this whole talk up in relax. But I know, because I've done that before, then what the little me does, it goes around trying to relax, doesn't it? So, suffice to say that nothing changes as long as you resist it. You can't even inquire into something as long as you're resisting it, right? You can't really look at a belief as long as you're trying to push the belief away and pretend you don't have it, and you're horrified by the fact that it exists, and you feel so much shame you can't even function straight. You can't actually look at it without starting to see that, number one, all that resistance comes from another belief, right? That it shouldn't be there. Right? I think that one of the most important lessons to learn, if there's a lesson to be learned, was, I repeat this often too, which is, I got this from one of my favorite enlightened guys, Anthony DeMello. For those of you who haven't heard of Anthony DeMello, he's no longer with us. He died, I believe, in the late 80s, somewhere around there. And he was a Jesuit priest, of all things. And he was very awake. And it's amazing that the church didn't kick him out before he died. But somehow he got away with some really wild stuff. And anyway, he used to start a retreat. You imagine starting a retreat with a bunch of Jesuits, right? He was, and he would start off his retreats by saying, "Look, let's get one thing straight. If we don't get this one thing straight, nothing can happen in this retreat." Right? They're at a spiritual retreat now, right? Catholic Jesuit retreat, right? And the head of the retreat is saying, we can't do it, nothing can happen until we all get one thing straight. And the one thing we all have to get straight is this: I'm an ass, you're an ass, now let's get over it. Right? I'd kind of like to hear that in church now and then, wouldn't you? No, of course it's a great saying, it's funny and it's lovely, and there's a really deep truth in it, right? Because as long as we're horrified with ourselves, we're stuck with ourselves. And our horror about ourselves, of our own ignorance, of all the stuff we've done, it's just a denial. It's a form of hidden arrogance. You know, when we can finally realize, yeah, I'm an ass, you're an ass, and I just get over it. I've been an ass. We've all been an ass. We've all done things that were cruel and unkind and stupid and unconscious and all of that. And yes, I'm an ass. It's not so bad. Right? Right? It's a human thing. Everybody's been an ass pretty much. Maybe there's a few individuals that had the karmic inheritance of a small flea that, you know, weren't much of an ass at some point in their life, but for the other 99.9% of us, I'm afraid we have to make the same admission. So, even though it sounds funny, and it is, there's a deep truth hidden in it. And he's right. We can't really start, much less sustain anything, as long as we don't get over the beliefs that are creating blame and shame and taking everything personally. Right? You can't start to move beyond it until you get that basic thing. Until we get hidden arrogance. Because see, shame is actually arrogance inverted, right? I'm so ashamed at what I did, which means I'm arrogant enough about myself that I'm surprised by what I did. I'm no longer at all surprised by anything I did. Right? And I'd done some dumb things in my life, right? But I'm no longer surprised because I realize consciousness isn't surprised. Right? It never goes. That's a form. Why would we be surprised at what happened? It makes no sense. And then there's letting go. Then consciousness can let go of its identification with the vehicle, because it's no longer surprised. It's like, yeah, it's a vehicle. Yeah, it's done a lot of dumb things, but you can't blame it. It was awake. It was asleep at the wheel. Right? Like Jesus said, you know, when they were just about to kill him, forgive them, for they know not what they do. That is a deep understanding of the nature of the way things work. It means nobody means you also and nobody else. Nobody does anything with the intent to harm unless they're deluded. Everything arises from ultimately a misunderstanding. The misunderstanding is essentially the belief that we're separate. And all the others arise from that. And it's when you find the basic thing, it's not evil and terrible and there's not maliciousness in it. It's ultimately, it's a very innocent misunderstanding about the nature of ourselves. And only when we've seen this for ourselves do we realize too, yes, forgive them, forgive oneself, for they and we knew not what we were doing. And when you see it, again, consciousness or spirit, there's nothing that can hold it within this limitation of form anymore. It spontaneously starts to let go and goes to our true state,